The courtroom was silent when the billionaire stood up, his voice sharp and certain, echoing off the polished walls. Every eye turned toward the woman seated alone at the defense table, the maid who had worked in his home for years. He didn't hesitate. He pointed at her and accused her of hurting his daughter. The words landed like a hammer, heavy and final. Gasps rippled through the room, and cameras clicked as the story everyone thought they understood suddenly took a darker turn. He was a man used to being believed. Powerful, wealthy, respected. When he spoke, people listened. He told the court that his little girl had come to him bruised and afraid, and that the only person alone with her that day was a maid. He said he trusted her once, welcomed her into his home, treated her like family. Now, he claimed that trust had been betrayed. To him, the case was already closed. Across the room, the maid sat very still. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, but her eyes stayed forward. She had raised that child since she was a baby. She had tied her shoes, packed her lunches, held her through nightmares. She knew every habit, every fear, every smile. And now, she was being painted as a monster. She wanted to speak, to explain, to defend herself, but no one had asked her yet. The judge called for order as the prosecutor laid out the charges. The words assault and abuse hung in the air, cold and heavy. The billionaire's lawyers nodded confidently, as the outcome was already decided. In cases like this, power often speaks louder than truth. The maid's past, her position, her silence, everything seemed to work against her. Then the judge asked for the child to be brought in. The girl walked slowly to the witness stand, her feet barely touching the floor. She looked smaller than anyone remembered. The billionaire softened the moment he saw her, his anger replaced with concern. He reached out, whispering encouragement, reminding her she was safe now. The courtroom leaned in, waiting for the words that would seal the maid's fate. But something about the girl's face didn't match the story. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared in the way people expected. Her eyes kept drifting toward the maid, filled with something harder to name. Confusion, maybe, or loyalty. The judge asked her to tell the truth, to speak clearly, to say who hurt her. The girl took a breath. The room held it with her. And just as she opened her mouth to speak, the certainty in the billionaire's eyes began to crack. Because whatever she was about to say, it wasn't the story he had told the court. The girl's voice was soft when she finally spoke, so quiet that the judge leaned forward to hear her better. She glanced at her father, then back at the maid, her fingers curling tightly around the edge of the stand. The courtroom waited, but before she could finish her first sentence, the judge gently stopped her, reminding her to answer only what was asked. That pause alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. To understand how things reached this point, the court had to go back months, long before the accusations, before the flashing cameras and hushed whispers. The billionaire's home was known for its size and luxury, but behind the tall gates, it was a quiet place. After his wife passed away, the house felt empty despite the staff. Business trips kept him away often, leaving his young daughter in the care of the woman who now sat accused. The maid had come into their lives during that difficult time. She was patient, calm, and steady, someone the child quickly grew attached to. Teachers at school often mentioned how polite and thoughtful the girl was. Neighbors saw the two walking hand in hand in the garden, laughing over simple things. To most people, the maid wasn't just an employee. She was a constant presence, a source of comfort in a home marked by loss. But things began to shift when the billionaire started spending more time at home. He noticed changes he couldn't explain. His daughter became quieter, more distant. She flinched at sudden noises, avoided certain rooms, and sometimes refused to be alone. Concern turned into suspicion. He asked questions, searched for answers, and when he saw marks on her arm one evening, fear took over. In his mind, there was only one explanation. The maid remembered that night clearly. The billionaire came home early, his face tight with anger and worry. He didn't raise his voice, but his words were sharp, cutting. He asked where the girl had been, what had happened, why she looked afraid. The maid tried to explain, but he wasn't listening anymore. From that moment on, the trust between them shattered. In court, the prosecution painted a clear picture, a powerful father protecting his child from harm. They spoke of responsibility, of betrayal, of a line that should never be crossed. Each word pushed the maid further into the shadows, making her seem smaller, quieter, almost invisible. Yet those who watched closely noticed how the girl's eyes filled whenever the maid's name was mentioned. When it was the maid's turn to speak, her voice barely carried across the room. She didn't deny caring for the child. She admitted she had been strict at times, like any caregiver, but she swore she would never hurt her. She spoke about late nights, bedtime stories, tears wiped away in the dark. Her words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded tired, heavy with truth, or at least a version of it. Still, the question remained unanswered. What really happened inside that house? Why did the girl hesitate? And why did her silence seem to challenge everything her father believed? As the judge called for a short recess, the girl looked back one more time, locking eyes with the maid, and in that look was a message no one in the courtroom could ignore, but no one could yet understand. When the court resumed, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. The billionaire sat rigid in his seat, jaw tight, replaying every memory that had led him here. To him, this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a father's fear made public. He kept telling himself he was doing the right thing, that protecting his daughter mattered more than reputation or headlines. Still, doubt crept in, quiet and unwanted, sparked by the way his daughter hesitated on the stand. The defense called their first witness, a school counselor who worked closely with the girl. She spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it might break something fragile. She described a child who was sensitive, thoughtful, and deeply attached to routine. Change unsettled her. Loss affected her deeply. When asked if the girl had ever mentioned being harmed by the maid, the counselor paused. She said the girl often spoke about feeling scared, but never clearly said who or what caused it. That uncertainty stirred murmurs across the courtroom. From the maid's side, her lawyer worked to show another angle. Life inside the mansion was not as simple as it appeared. Staff came and went. Security guards rotated. The house itself was large, with long hallways and quiet corners. The maid wasn't always alone with the child, despite what the accusation suggested. Yet none of that erased the powerful image of a father standing against a woman who worked in his home. The girl was brought back to a private room with a child advocate, away from the crowd. Through a small window, the billionaire watched, his heart aching. He remembered nights when his daughter cried for her mother, mornings when she refused to eat, moments when he wasn't there, guilt mixed with anger. If something had happened under his roof, how could he have missed it? Meanwhile, the maid sat with her hands folded, eyes closed for a moment. She remembered the child's laughter in the garden, the songs they sang together, the promises she made to keep her safe. She wondered how love could be twisted into suspicion so quickly. She knew the truth, but the truth felt small against money, influence, and fear. The judge requested more evidence, more time. Reports were reviewed, timelines questioned. Small details suddenly mattered. A door left open, a raised voice overheard, a moment that meant one thing to one person and something else entirely to another. Each detail added another layer to the mystery, not clarity. As the day wore on, the girl sat quietly, listening to adults argue about her life. She clutched a small object in her hand, something she hadn't let go of since morning. No one noticed it yet, but it seemed to ground her, as if it carried a memory she wasn't ready to share. By the time court adjourned again, nothing felt certain anymore. The billionaire's confidence had softened into worry. The maid's fear had hardened into resolve. And the girl, caught between them, held a truth that could change everything, if and when she chose to speak it aloud. The next morning, the courtroom filled faster than before. News had spread, and the case was no longer just about a family. It had become a public trial of trust, power, and truth. The billionaire arrived early, surrounded by lawyers, his face calm but strained. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the certainty he once carried was slipping away. He kept glancing toward the door, waiting for his daughter to be brought in, needing to see her, to remind himself why he was here. The maid entered quietly from the other side. She wore the same simple clothes, her posture straight despite the weight pressing down on her. People whispered as she passed, some with judgment, others with doubt. She had learned to endure silence in the mansion. Now she endured it in public. Still, her eyes searched the room for one person only, the girl. When the child finally appeared, holding the hand of the advocate, the room seemed to shrink. She looked smaller than ever, caught between two worlds that both claimed to protect her. The judge explained that today, the court needed clarity. No pressure, no raised voices, just the truth, spoken in her own time. The words were kind, but the tension was sharp enough to cut through them. The prosecution moved quickly, laying out timelines again, emphasizing moments when the maid was alone with the girl. Each detail was repeated, sharpened, made to sound certain. The billionaire listened, nodding along, but his eyes never left his daughter. He noticed how she shifted in her seat, how her grip tightened around that small object she still carried. Then the defense stood. They asked to replay a short statement recorded earlier by the child advocate, meant to help the court understand the girl's emotional state. The room grew still as the audio began. The girl's voice, softer than before, spoke about feeling scared sometimes, about loud arguments, about not knowing who to tell. She never named anyone. That absence echoed louder than any accusation. The billionaire's breath caught. Loud arguments? He thought back to late nights on the phone, to raised voices in his office, to stress he carried home without realizing it. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, quickly buried. But it was there. Across the room, the maid lowered her head, as if recognizing something unspoken in the girl's words. The judge called the girl back to the stand one last time. This time, no one interrupted her. The courtroom leaned forward as one. She looked at her father, then at the maid, then down at her hands. Slowly, she opened her palm, revealing the small object she'd been holding, a simple, worn item that clearly meant something to her. Her lips trembled. She took a breath, deeper than before. "I need to say something," she whispered. The billionaire felt his heart pound. The maid's fingers clenched together. Every person in the room sensed that the next words could change everything. Reputations, lives, the future of a child caught in the middle. The judge nodded gently, giving her permission to continue. And as the girl lifted her eyes and began to speak, the truth hovered on the edge of the courtroom, ready to fall, leaving everyone bracing for what would come next. The girl's voice trembled as she spoke, but it didn't break. She said she had been scared, yes, but not in the way everyone thought. She explained that fear didn't always come from hands or shouting. Sometimes it came from secrets, from silence, from being told not to talk about certain things. The courtroom leaned in closer, sensing a shift. This was not the story they had prepared themselves to hear. She looked at her father again, and this time there was something different in her eyes. Not anger, not blame, just a quiet question, as if she were asking whether it was finally safe to tell the whole truth. The billionaire swallowed hard. For the first time, he didn't nod or guide her with his eyes. He simply sat there listening. Then she said something that sent a murmur through the room. She mentioned another person in the house. Not the maid. Someone who came and went. Someone most people barely noticed. A name surfaced, one tied to security, to trust, to access. The judge raised a hand for silence, but it was too late. The mood had changed. The case had just widened. The billionaire's lawyers stiffened. This was not part of the plan. They exchanged quick glances, already calculating damage control. The maid's lawyer leaned forward, alert now, sensing a door cracking open. The maid herself looked stunned, her eyes filling as realization dawned. She had felt something was wrong for months. Uneasy moments, unexplained tension, but she had never imagined this. The girl didn't accuse. She simply described moments. Doors left unlocked. Voices she didn't recognize. Being told to stay in her room. Being given gifts and told they were just between us. The words were careful, innocent, but heavy with meaning. Enough to raise questions no one could ignore. The billionaire felt the room spin. His mind raced back through memories he had dismissed. Security reports he skimmed. Staff changes he approved without thought. Nights he wasn't home. The idea that danger could exist so close, unnoticed, crushed him. Protecting his daughter had always been his goal. Now he had to face the possibility that he had been looking in the wrong direction all along. The judge called for another recess, his expression grave. He ordered a review of all household staff and security logs. Phones were checked. Whispers spread through the gallery. What began as a simple accusation had turned into something far more complex, a web of power, silence, and misplaced blame. As the girl was led away again, she turned back one last time. Her eyes met the maid's, and this time there was no confusion there, only trust. The maid pressed her hand to her chest, holding back tears, knowing the truth was finally moving, even if it wasn't fully out yet. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled, headlines already changing. Inside, the billionaire sat alone for a moment, the weight of his mistakes settling in. He had come seeking justice, certain of his enemy. Now he was left with a terrifying question. If the maid wasn't the threat, then who had been watching his daughter all this time? And as the doors closed and the judge prepared to resume, one thing was clear. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the fallout, and no one was ready for what would be uncovered next. When the court reconvened, the air felt tight, almost electric. The judge's expression was firm as new information was presented. Security logs, access records, and witness statements that had been overlooked in the rush to blame. The name the girl mentioned came back into focus, this time supported by quiet facts instead of fear. A staff member with routine access, a presence that blended into the background. Someone trusted simply because they wore a badge and followed rules on paper. The girl returned to the stand, steadier now. She spoke slowly, choosing word that felt safe. She explained that the maid had always been the one who stayed with her when she felt uneasy, the one who listened when she didn't know how to explain what was wrong. She said she had been told not to talk, that she might get someone in trouble if she did. Her small hands gripped the rail, but her voice didn't shake. This time, no one interrupted her. The billionaire's face drained of color as the truth settled in. The certainty he once had collapsed under the weight of what he had missed. He realized how his fear had narrowed his vision, how power and urgency had pushed him to the wrong conclusion. When the judge asked if he wished to respond, he stood slowly, his voice low. He said he had been wrong, not confused, not mistaken. Wrong. The word echoed, heavy and final. The maid was cleared in that moment, not with celebration, but with quiet relief. Tears slipped down her face as the tension finally loosened its grip. The judge dismissed the accusation against her, stating clearly that there was no evidence to support it. The room shifted. Whispers turned to stunned silence. A life, nearly destroyed, was given back, though it would never be the same. The billionaire crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. He apologized, not with excuses, but with humility. He thanked the maid for protecting his daughter when he couldn't. She nodded, unable to speak, her eyes moving to the girl who had finally found her voice. Just when it seemed the case had reached its end, the judge raised one more point. A document had surfaced during the review, an internal report filed months earlier, noting concerns about security procedures that were never followed up. It bore the billionaire's signature, approved during a time when his focus was elsewhere. The implication was clear. The system he trusted had failed, and he had unknowingly allowed it. The final twist wasn't loud. It was quiet, unsettling. Justice had been served in the courtroom, but accountability stretched beyond it. As proceedings closed, the billionaire understood that protecting his daughter meant more than winning a case. It meant changing the world around her. As they left, the girl reached for the maid's hand, then her father's, holding both. The cameras flashed, but for the first time, no one spoke. The truth had come out, not as a victory, but as a lesson, one that would follow them long after the courtroom lights dimmed. In the weeks that followed, life outside the courtroom moved slowly, as if everyone involved needed time to breathe again. The headlines faded, replaced by quieter conversations about truth, trust, and how easily fear can blind even those who mean well. The billionaire returned home, but the mansion no longer felt the same. Rooms once filled with certainty now carried echoes of missed signs and unasked questions. He made changes, not for appearances, but out of responsibility. Systems were reviewed, routines adjusted, and people were finally listened to. He spent more time at home, not as a powerful figure managing everything from a distance, but as a father learning how to truly be present. With his daughter, he listened more than he spoke. He learned that protection doesn't come from control, but from understanding. The girl began to heal in her own quiet way. She returned to school, slowly finding her confidence again. She spoke more openly, no longer holding her fears inside. What stayed with her most wasn't the courtroom or the noise around it, but the moment she realized her words mattered. That truth gave her strength. She knew now that speaking up could change things, even when it felt scary. The maid chose to step away from the mansion, not out of bitterness, but to reclaim her peace. Before she left, the girl hugged her tightly, promising never to forget her. They stayed in touch, connected by a bond that went beyond roles or titles. The accusation had nearly destroyed her life, but also revealed her strength. She carried that forward, knowing her truth had finally been heard. For the billionaire, the lesson was humbling. He learned how quickly assumptions can turn into accusations, and how power can silence the wrong voices if it's not guided by care. He publicly acknowledged his mistake, not to erase it, but to own it. In doing so, he hoped others would pause before judging, before pointing fingers, before letting fear decide the story. The case became a reminder far beyond that courtroom. It showed how easily the vulnerable could be overlooked, how trust must be earned every day, and how truth often comes from the smallest voice in the room. It wasn't wealth or influence that changed the outcome. It was a child finding the courage to speak honestly. On a quiet afternoon months later, the billionaire and his daughter sat together in the garden. There were no cameras, no lawyers, no pressure. Just sunlight, fresh air, and a sense of rebuilding. The girl laughed as she played, her sound light and free. Watching her, the billionaire understood something he hadn't before. Real justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about listening, learning, and choosing to do better. And in the end, that was the true resolution. Not just a cleared name or a closed case, but family change, a wrong corrected, and a powerful reminder that truth, when finally given space, has a way of setting everyone free.